Peta had walked through fire, blood, and broken treaties in his 32 years, but nothing could have prepared him for the sound that tore through the Arizona canyon that afternoon. A woman's voice screaming 3 words that made his heart stop. "Push harder, please." He had been tracking a wounded elk through the red rock country south of Fort Verde when he heard it. Desperate, raw, the kind of sound that came from someone fighting death with their bare hands. The elk had left a blood trail that wound through juniper thickets and across sun-baked stone, and Peta had been following it since dawn, his bow ready, his mind focused on the hunt. But that scream changed everything. It cut through the stillness like a knife, echoing off the canyon walls, bouncing back at him from every direction. Peta moved fast, his moccasins silent against the stone as he followed the voice down into a narrow ravine where the sun barely touched. What he saw made his blood turn cold. A white woman was pressed against the canyon wall, her hands covered in blood, her face twisted in pain and fear. She was leaning over someone, a younger girl, maybe 16, lying flat on the ground with her eyes half closed and her lips turning blue. The older woman had her palms pressed hard against the girl's chest, pushing down with everything she had, her shoulders hunched forward, her whole body trembling with the effort. "Come on, breathe," she gasped. "Please just breathe." Her voice cracked like dry wood snapping. Sweat poured down her face despite the cool shade of the canyon. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, dirt streaked across her arms, and her hair had come loose from its pins, falling in wild strands around her face. She looked like she had been fighting for hours, like she had given everything she had and still didn't know if it would be enough. Then she saw him. For a split second, their eyes locked. Hers were green, wide with terror, wet with tears she had no time to wipe away. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stared at him like he was either salvation or the last thing she would ever see. Her chest heaved with exhaustion. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the breath. Peta could see the fear in her eyes, but beneath it, something else. Desperation. The kind that made people take risks they would never normally take. The kind that made a white woman in the Arizona territory look at a Choctaw warrior and see hope instead of danger. Then finally the words came. "Help me," she whispered. Her voice barely made it past her lips. "She's dying." Peta didn't hesitate. He had seen enough death to recognize it when it was close. He dropped to his knees beside the girl and pressed 2 fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse. Nothing. Her skin was cold, colder than it should have been even in the shade. Her chest was still, no rise, no fall, just empty stillness that made his stomach tighten. He looked up at the woman. "How long has she been like this?" The woman's breath hitched. "I don't know. Maybe 2 minutes. Maybe more. We were climbing and she just collapsed. I tried to wake her, but she wouldn't respond. I've been pushing on her chest like my father taught me, but nothing's working." Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold them steady. Blood smeared her palms, though Peta couldn't tell yet if it was hers or the girl's. "She was fine this morning," the woman continued, her words tumbling out faster now. "A little tired maybe, but fine. Then we started climbing and she said she felt dizzy. I told her to rest, but she insisted we keep going. She didn't want to slow us down. And then she just fell. She didn't even cry out. She just dropped like someone had cut her strings." Peta gently moved her hands aside and placed his own over the girl's sternum. He pressed down hard, feeling the ribs flex beneath his palms, counting in his head, keeping rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. He had learned this from a medicine man in his tribe, a man named Tall Bear, who had seen enough death to know how to pull people back from the edge when their spirits were halfway gone. Tall Bear had taught him that death wasn't always final, not if you acted fast enough, not if you refused to let go. The old man had shown him how to read the body, how to feel for the faintest flicker of life, how to breathe air back into lungs that had forgotten how to fill. Peta had watched Tall Bear save 3 people in his lifetime, and he had watched him fail to save a dozen more. But the old man never stopped trying. Never stopped believing that life was worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed hopeless. He pushed again. And again. The woman beside him was breathing fast, her whole body trembling. Is she going to be all right? Peta didn't answer. He couldn't promise anything. Not yet. The girl's lips were still blue, her face slack, her body limp as a rag doll. But he could feel something, a faint warmth beneath her skin. A hint that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't slipped too far yet after 15 compressions. He tilted the girl's head back, pinched her nose, and breathed into her mouth. Once. Twice. Her chest rose slightly with each breath, then fell again when he pulled away. Then back to the chest compressions. The woman watched him with wide, unblinking eyes, her lips moving in what looked like a silent prayer. Her hands were clenched so tight, her knuckles had gone white. Peta kept working. His arms burned. Sweat dripped down his temples, stinging his eyes. The girl's body was limp, unresponsive, like trying to revive a stone. But he didn't stop. He had seen too many people give up too soon. He had buried too many who might have lived if someone had just kept fighting a little longer. His tribe had lost children to fever, to hunger, to wounds that festered when no medicine could be found. He had held his younger brother in his arms when the boy died from a snake bite. Had felt the exact moment when life slipped away. Had watched the light fade from his brother's eyes and known there was nothing he could do. He wasn't going to let that happen again. Not if he could help it. Not if there was even the smallest chance. Then, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute or two, the girl's chest jerked. A shallow, broken gasp rattled out of her throat. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy, but open. The woman let out a sob that was half relief, half disbelief. Oh God, oh thank God. She reached for the girl's hand and squeezed it tight. Emily, can you hear me? It's Lenora. You're safe now. The girl, Emily, blinked slowly. Her lips moved but no sound came out. She looked confused, like she didn't know where she was or what had happened. Her breathing was shallow, ragged, but it was there. Air moving in and out, proof that her body hadn't given up yet. Peta sat back on his heels, his chest heaving, his hands still sticky with blood that wasn't his. He wiped them on his buckskin pants and watched the girl carefully, making sure her chest kept rising and falling. Her color was still too pale, her breathing too weak, but she was alive. For now, that was when Lenora Garland finally looked at him. Really looked at him. Not with fear. Not with judgment. Just exhaustion and gratitude so raw it almost hurt to see. You saved her life, she said quietly. Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Peta shook his head. Not yet. She needs water. And shelter. Her body is shutting down. Lenora nodded quickly. There's a wagon about a mile north. We were traveling to Prescott when she started feeling weak. I thought she just needed rest, but then she collapsed and I didn't know what to do. Her words came out in a rush, like a dam breaking. I tried everything. I gave her water. I kept her in the shade, but nothing helped. Then she just stopped breathing, and I thought I'd lost her. I thought I was going to have to bury her out here in the middle of nowhere, with no one to help me dig the grave. Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her hand to her mouth. Fighting back tears, Peta stood and scanned the canyon. The sun was already starting to dip lower, painting the rocks in shades of orange and red. Long shadows stretched across the ground like dark fingers reaching for them. They didn't have much time before the temperature dropped. Nights in the high desert could kill just as easily as the heat. He had seen travelers freeze to death in April because they didn't respect how fast the cold could come. Didn't understand that the same sun that baked you during the day left you shivering once it disappeared. "Can you walk?" he asked Lenora. She nodded, though her legs looked unsteady. "I'll carry her," he said, already scooping Emily into his arms. The girl was light, too light. She felt like she was made of nothing but bones and cloth. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. Lenora stumbled to her feet and followed close behind, her hand briefly touching his arm as if to steady herself. "Thank you," she said again. Her voice was thick with emotion. Peita didn't respond. Words didn't matter right now. Only survival did. They made it to the wagon just as the sun kissed the horizon. It was a small covered rig, the kind settlers used when they didn't have much but still believed the West held something better for them. The canvas was patched in places, the wood weathered and worn from months of hard travel. A single mule stood tethered nearby, its ears flicking lazily at flies, its head lowered in the patient exhaustion of an animal that had walked too many miles. Inside the wagon, Lenora had blankets, a canteen of water, and a few supplies that looked like they had been packed in a hurry. There was a small trunk with brass corners, a sewing kit, a Bible with a cracked leather cover, and a tin box that probably held whatever money they had left. Everything was neat but worn, the belongings of people who took care of what little they owned, because they knew they might not get more. Peita laid Emily down gently on the wooden bed and covered her with a wool blanket that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Lenora knelt beside her, brushing the girl's hair back from her face with trembling fingers. "She's my sister," Lenora said quietly, as if she needed him to understand. "Our parents died last winter. Fever took them both within a week of each other. It swept through our town in Pennsylvania like wildfire. We buried them in the same grave because we couldn't afford two. It's just the two of us now. We were trying to start over in Prescott. A woman there said she could give me work as a seamstress. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep us fed. She's all I have left." Peita looked at the girl's pale face, at the shallow rise and fall of her chest. She wasn't out of danger yet. Her breathing was still too weak, too irregular. He could see the blue tinge still clinging to her lips, the way her eyelids fluttered like she was trapped somewhere between waking and sleeping. She needs medicine. Something to bring her strength back. Lenora's face fell. "I don't have anything like that. I used what little we had when she got sick 2 days ago. Some willow bark tea and honey. I thought she was getting better, but then today, she just..." Her voice broke. She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears that had been building for hours. Peita considered his options. There was a trading post about 5 miles east, run by a man named Jeb Cartwright, who kept whiskey, tobacco, and sometimes herbs if you knew what to ask for. Jeb didn't like Indians much, called them savages when he thought they couldn't hear, but he liked money more than he liked his prejudices. Peita had traded with him before, back when his tribe still had pelts and beadwork to barter, back before the treaties pushed them farther and farther from the good hunting grounds. But leaving these two women alone in the middle of the canyon felt like handing them over to wolves. Then again, if Emily didn't get what she needed, she wouldn't make it through the night. That much was certain. "I'll go," Peita said. "There's a place not far from here. I can bring back what she needs." Lenora's eyes widened. "You're leaving?" There was panic in her voice, sharp and immediate. The same panic he had heard from people who suddenly realized they were more alone than they thought. Peita met her gaze. "If I don't, she dies. You understand that?" Lenora swallowed hard, then nodded. "How long will you be gone?" Peita calculated the distance, the terrain, the time it would take to bargain with a man who didn't trust Choctaw warriors any more than he trusted rattlesnakes. 2 hours. Maybe less if the trail is clear. Lenora looked down at her sister, then back at him. What if something happens while you're gone? What if she stops breathing again? Her voice cracked on the question. Peita crouched down so they were eye level. "You did good before. You kept her alive long enough for me to find you. If it happens again, you do the same thing. You push on her chest. You breathe into her lungs. You don't stop until she comes back. You understand?" Lenora's hands were trembling again, but she nodded. "All right. I'll try." Her voice was steadier now, though fear still flickered in her eyes like a candle flame in the wind. Peita stood and turned toward the canyon opening. The wind was picking up, carrying the scent of juniper and dust and something else. Something that smelled like rain, even though the sky was clear. Before he left, he glanced back at her one more time. "Keep a fire going. And don't let anyone near this wagon unless you know them." Lenora frowned. "Why, is someone else out here?" Peita's jaw tightened. "There's always someone else out here." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The Arizona territory was full of men who would take what they wanted if they thought they could get away with it. Drifters, outlaws, deserters from the army, men who had lost everything and decided that meant they had nothing left to lose. Men who saw women alone and thought opportunity instead of mercy. He disappeared into the twilight, moving fast and silent through the rocks like a shadow given form. Behind him, Lenora Garland sat alone in a wagon with her dying sister and a fading fire, wondering if the man who had just saved their lives would ever come back. She added wood to the fire, watching the flames grow taller, casting flickering shadows on the canyon walls that danced and twisted like living things. Emily stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering but not opening, her lips moving in soundless words. Lenora smoothed the blanket over her and whispered soft reassurances, though she wasn't sure if her sister could hear them. "You're going to be fine," she said. "He's going to bring medicine and you're going to be fine." She said it again and again. Like a prayer, like if she said it enough times it might become true. And in the distance, unseen but always watching, a pair of eyes followed Peita's movements from the ridge above. Eyes that belonged to a man who had been tracking the same canyon for days, looking for something valuable. Something worth stealing. Something like two women traveling alone with no one to protect them. The man's name was Silas Rook, and he had been watching the wagon since yesterday morning. He had seen them struggle up the trail, had seen the younger girl collapse, had seen Lenora's desperate attempts to revive her. He had stayed hidden, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the opportunity to present itself the way opportunities always did, if you were patient enough. And now, with the Choctaw warrior gone, that moment had finally come. Silas Rook was a man who had learned to survive by taking what others left unguarded. He had been a soldier once, back before the war ended and left him with nothing but scars and a hatred for anyone who had more than he did. He had fought for the Union, had watched friends die in mud and blood, had come home to find his farm sold for taxes, and his wife remarried to a man who could actually provide for her. After that, he stopped caring about right and wrong. He stopped caring about much of anything except getting by. He moved down from the ridge slowly, carefully, his boots barely making a sound on the loose stone. He kept his hand on the knife at his belt, though he didn't think he would need it. Not against one exhausted woman and a half-dead girl. He could already see what was in that wagon. The trunk, the supplies, maybe even a little cash hidden somewhere. And if the woman gave him trouble, well, he knew how to deal with that too. He had dealt with it before. The night was coming fast, swallowing the canyon in darkness. And with it, a danger neither Peita nor Lenora could see yet. But it was there, waiting in the shadows, patient and hungry. And it had already decided what it wanted. Peita moved through the darkening canyon like smoke, his feet finding purchase on stones that would have tripped a less experienced man. The trading post was 5 miles east, but he knew a shortcut that would cut the distance in half if he was willing to climb. He was willing. Every minute he wasted was a minute Emily Garland might not have. The night air was cooling fast, pulling the heat from the rocks and replacing it with a chill that bit through his buckskin shirt. He could hear coyotes in the distance, their yips and howls echoing across the empty land, talking to each other in a language older than any treaty or border. Above him, stars were beginning to appear, pinpricks of light in the sky that seemed to go on forever. He thought about the two women he had left behind. About Lenora's green eyes, wide with fear and gratitude. About the way she had looked at him, not with the usual suspicion white settlers carried like armor, but with something else. Trust, maybe. Or desperation so deep, it looked like trust. He had seen that look before, on the faces of his own people when the soldiers came to move them off their land. The look of someone who knew they were powerless and hated it. The look of someone who had to rely on the mercy of strangers because they had run out of other options. It was a look that made him angry and sad at the same time. Angry at a world that put people in positions where they had to beg for help. Sad that he recognized it so easily. The shortcut took him up a steep ravine where handholds were scarce, and the rock crumbled under his fingers if he wasn't careful. He climbed in near darkness, relying on memory and instinct more than sight. Halfway up, his hand slipped and he caught himself on a jutting stone that cut into his palm. He felt blood, warm and slick, but he didn't stop. Pain was just information. It told him he was alive and still capable of feeling, which meant he was still capable of moving forward. At the top of the ravine, he paused to catch his breath and look back toward where he had come from. In the distance, he could see a faint orange glow. Lenora's fire. It looked small and fragile against the vast darkness of the canyon, like a single candle trying to hold back the night. He hoped it would be enough. He hoped she would be smart enough to keep it burning, to stay alert, to not let her guard down just because she was tired. Then he turned and kept moving. The trading post appeared after another 20 minutes of hard walking, a squat wooden structure with a sagging roof and a single lantern hanging by the door. Smoke curled from a crooked chimney, carrying the smell of burning mesquite and something cooking, probably beans or salt pork. Peta approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. Jeb Cartwright was the kind of man who shot first and asked questions later if you startled him. The door was open despite the cold, and Peta could hear voices inside. 2 men, maybe 3. He stepped into the light and knocked on the doorframe. Cartwright. I need to trade. The conversation inside stopped immediately. A moment later, Jeb Cartwright appeared in the doorway, a heavy-set man with a gray beard and eyes that were always calculating, always looking for an angle. He held a rifle loosely in one hand, not quite pointed at Peta, but not pointed away either. Peta, Jeb said, his voice flat. Didn't expect to see you out here tonight. Peta nodded. I need medicine. Herbs for fever and weakness. Whatever you have. Jeb's eyes narrowed. Who's sick? Peta hesitated. He didn't want to give Jeb too much information, didn't want the man knowing about 2 women alone in the canyon. But he needed those herbs, and Jeb wasn't going to hand them over without some kind of explanation. A girl, Peta said finally. She collapsed. Her heart stopped. I brought her back, but she needs medicine, or she won't last the night. Jeb studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. Come in, let's see what you got to trade. Inside, the trading post was cramped and smoky. Shelves lined the walls, packed with everything from ammunition to canned goods to bolts of fabric. 2 men sat at a table near the fire, both of them rough-looking types with the kind of weathered faces that came from years of hard living. They looked up when Peta entered, their eyes lingering on him with the kind of suspicion he had learned to ignore. Jeb walked behind the counter and pulled out a wooden box. I got willow bark, yarrow, and some dried elderflower. That should help with the fever. But it ain't cheap. Peta reached into the pouch at his belt and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. Inside were 3 pieces of turquoise, polished smooth and set in silver. They were the last pieces of his mother's jewelry, the only things he had left from her after she died. He had been saving them for something important, something worth the sacrifice. This qualified. He laid them on the counter. Jev picked up one of the pieces and held it to the light, examining it with the practiced eye of a man who had seen a lot of stolen goods pass through his hands. "This is fine work," he said grudgingly. "Choctaw?" Peta nodded. "My mother made them." Jeb grunted and set the piece down. "I'll give you the herbs for 2 of these. The third one, I'll throw in some dried meat and a blanket. That girl's gonna need more than medicine if she's as bad off as you say." Peta wanted to argue, wanted to tell Jeb that those pieces were worth twice what he was offering, but he didn't have time. Every minute he spent haggling was another minute Emily's condition could worsen. "Deal," he said. Jeb swept the turquoise into a drawer and started packing the herbs into a cloth sack. While he worked, one of the men at the table spoke up. "You said a girl collapsed? Where at?" Peta didn't answer. He just watched Jeb's hands, waiting for the sack to be ready. The man persisted. "Only asking 'cause we saw a wagon headed north yesterday. 2 women looked like they were struggling." "That the same folks?" Peta's jaw tightened. He should have known word would travel. In a place like this, where there were more rocks than people, any piece of news was worth sharing. "Don't know what you saw," he said flatly. The second man leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Funny thing, Peta. We also saw Silas Rook heading in that same direction this morning. You know Silas, don't you? Man's got a nose for opportunity." Peta felt something cold settle in his stomach. Silas Rook, he knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew the name. Rook was a scavenger, a man who made his living off other people's misfortune. He robbed travelers, stole from the dead, and wasn't above worse if he thought he could get away with it. If Rook had seen the wagon, if he knew there were 2 women alone out there, then Lenora and Emily were in more danger than Peta had realized. Jeb slid the sack across the counter, along with a rolled blanket and a bundle of jerky. "There you go. That should do it." Peta grabbed the supplies and turned to leave, but the first man spoke again. "You planning on going back out there tonight?" Peta paused at the door. "That's my business." The man laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Sure it is. Just saying, if Silas is sniffing around, you might want to hurry. Man's got a reputation for not leaving much behind." Peta didn't respond. He stepped out into the night and started running. The way back felt longer than the way there. Every step weighted with urgency. His mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. If Rook had already reached the wagon, if he had confronted Lenora while Peta was gone, there was no telling what might have happened. Rook was dangerous, but he was also a coward. He preferred easy targets, people who couldn't fight back. A woman and a dying girl would be exactly the kind of prey he looked for. Peta pushed himself harder, ignoring the burning in his lungs and the ache in his legs. The herbs bounced against his side with every stride. The blanket felt heavier than it should have. He tried to move faster, tried to shave seconds off the distance, but the canyon seemed to stretch on forever. When he finally saw the orange glow of Lenora's fire again, relief flooded through him. The wagon was still there. The fire was still burning. That meant she was still alive, still waiting. But as he got closer, he noticed something wrong. The fire was too bright, too big. Lenora had added too much wood, more than she needed for warmth. That kind of fire was a signal, a beacon. Either she was trying to scare something away, or she was hoping someone would see it and come help. Neither option was good. Peta slowed his approach, moving carefully now, listening for voices or movement. He could see the wagon clearly in the firelight, but he couldn't see Lenora. Then he heard her voice, sharp and frightened. "I said stay back." Peta moved around the edge of the firelight and saw him. Silas Rook, standing about 10 feet from the wagon. His hands raised in a gesture that was probably meant to look harmless, but didn't. He was a wiry man with a scarred face and eyes that never quite looked at you straight on. He wore a long coat that had seen better days, and a hat pulled low over his forehead. "Easy now," Rook was saying, his voice smooth and oily. "I'm just a traveler looking for a warm fire. Didn't mean to startle you." Lenora stood between Rook and the wagon, a long piece of firewood gripped in both hands like a club. Her face was pale but determined. "I don't care what you are."
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
"You need to leave." "Now," Rook chuckled, a sound that made Peeta's skin crawl. "That's not very hospitable, ma'am. Out here, folks usually share what they got. Fire, food, maybe a little conversation. Helps pass the time." Lenora's grip on the wood tightened. "I don't have anything to share. And I don't want your conversation." Rook took a step closer. "See, I think you do have something. I saw that trunk in your wagon. Looks like it might have something valuable inside. And that mule there, that's a good animal. Worth a fair bit to the right buyer." Peeta stepped into the firelight. "She told you to leave." His voice cut through the night like a blade. Rook spun around, his hand going to the knife at his belt, but he froze when he saw Peeta. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other. Rook's eyes flicked from Peeta's face to the supplies slung over his shoulder, then back again. "Well, well," Rook said slowly. "The hero returns. I was wondering where you'd gone off to." Peeta didn't move. "Walk away, Rook. There's nothing for you here," Rook smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's where you're wrong, friend. There's plenty for me here. Two women, alone in the middle of nowhere, one of them too sick to move. That's what I call opportunity." Lenora's voice shook but stayed steady. "We don't have any money. We don't have anything worth stealing." Rook laughed. "Everyone's got something worth taking, ma'am. Money, supplies, dignity. I'm not picky." Peeta took a step forward, putting himself between Rook and Lenora. "Last chance. Leave now or I make you leave." Rook's smile faded. His hand tightened on the knife handle. "You think you scare me, Indian? I've killed better men than you over a lot less." Peeta's voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it now, something hard and unyielding. "Then you know what it looks like when a man decides he's got nothing left to lose. Take a good look, Rook. That's what you're seeing right now." For a long moment, the canyon held its breath. The fire crackled. The wind whispered through the rocks. Rook's eyes darted between Peeta and Lenora, calculating his odds, weighing his options. Finally, he took a step back. "This ain't over," he said. "You can't watch them forever. Sooner or later, you'll slip up. And when you do, I'll be waiting." He turned and disappeared into the darkness, his footsteps fading into the night. Peeta didn't relax until he was sure Rook was gone, didn't lower his guard until the sounds of the canyon returned to normal. Only then did he turn to Lenora. She was trembling, the firewood still gripped tight in her hands. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, but her voice betrayed her. "He was watching us. I could feel it before I saw him. He just walked out of the shadows like he owned the place." Peeta took the firewood from her hands and set it aside. "He's gone now. But he'll come back. Men like Rook always come back." Lenora's face went pale. "What do we do?" Peeta looked toward the wagon where Emily lay sleeping, her breathing still shallow and weak. "We give your sister the medicine. We make her strong enough to travel. And then we leave this canyon before Rook decides to bring friends." Lenora nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what he was saying. They weren't safe here. They never had been. And now, with Rook circling like a vulture, their time was running out. Peeta pulled the herbs from his sack and handed them to Lenora. Boil these in water. Make her drink as much as she can. It'll taste bitter, but it'll help." Lenora took the herbs with shaking hands. "Thank you. For everything. For saving her. For coming back. For standing between me and that man." Peta shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. We're not safe. Not until we're out of this canyon and far away from here." He glanced into the darkness where Rook had disappeared. Somewhere out there, the scavenger was watching, waiting, planning his next move. And Peta knew with absolute certainty that the next time Rook came, he wouldn't come alone. The herbs worked faster than Peta expected. By the time the first light of dawn touched the canyon walls, Emily's color had improved from deathly pale to something closer to human. Her breathing had steadied, deeper now, more regular. She had even opened her eyes twice during the night, though she hadn't spoken, and seemed confused about where she was. Lenora sat beside her sister through the dark hours, spooning the bitter tea into Emily's mouth a little at a time, whispering encouragements that only the two of them could hear. Peta kept watch from outside the wagon, his back against a boulder, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The night had been long and cold, and he hadn't slept. He couldn't afford to. Not with Silas Rook somewhere out there in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity when the sun finally rose. Painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Lenora emerged from the wagon, looking exhausted but relieved. "She's better," Lenora said quietly. "Not well, but better." She asked for water, and she drank it on her own. That's the first time in 2 days she's done anything on her own. Peta nodded. "That's good. But we can't stay here. We need to move as soon as she's strong enough to travel." Lenora looked around the canyon, her eyes lingering on the high walls and narrow passages. "Where would we go? Prescott is still 3 days away, and I don't know if Emily can handle that kind of journey yet." Peta had been thinking about that all night. Prescott was the logical destination, but the route there took them through open country where they would be exposed and vulnerable. Rook knew they were heading that way. He could easily get ahead of them, set up an ambush, wait for them to walk right into his trap. "There's another option," Peta said. "About 15 miles south, there's a settlement. Not much more than a church and a few houses, but there's a woman there named Maria Consuela. She's a healer. She helped my people when the soldiers wouldn't let us see the fort doctor. If we can get Emily there, Maria can make her strong enough for the rest of the journey to Prescott." Lenora considered this. 15 miles. Can Emily make that? Peta looked toward the wagon. "If we go slow and stop when she needs to rest, yes. But we have to leave soon. The longer we wait, the more time we give Rook to plan." Lenora nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Then we leave now. I'll get Emily ready." She turned back toward the wagon, then paused. "Peta, why are you helping us? You don't know us. You don't owe us anything. You could have walked away yesterday, and no one would have blamed you." It was a fair question. Peta had asked himself the same thing during the long night. The easy answer was that he had been raised to help people who needed it, that his mother had taught him that a man's worth was measured by what he did when no one was watching. But there was more to it than that. He had seen too many people die alone, too many lives cut short because no one cared enough to intervene. He had held his brother as the boy's life drained away, had watched his mother waste away from an illness that could have been treated if the fort doctor had been willing to see her. He couldn't save them, but maybe he could save Emily and Lenora. Maybe that would be enough to balance the scales, even just a little, because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. Lenora studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you," she said softly, and disappeared back into the wagon. Peta began preparing for the journey. He checked the mule's harness, made sure the wheels on the wagon were sound, filled the water canteens from a small spring he knew was hidden behind a cluster of rocks nearby. While he worked, he kept his ears open, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Birds singing in the brush, wind moving through the canyon, the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. But he didn't trust them. Rook was out there somewhere, and men like Rook knew how to move quietly when they wanted to. An hour later, they were ready. Emily was propped up in the back of the wagon, wrapped in blankets, her face still pale but her eyes clearer than they had been. She looked at Peter with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Lenora says you saved my life," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Peter shook his head. "Your sister saved your life. I just helped." Emily managed a weak smile. "She told me what you did. How you brought me back when my heart stopped. I don't remember any of it, but I believe her." She paused, studying him with an intensity that belied her weakened state. "Are you really Choctaw?" Peter nodded. "I am." Emily's expression softened. "My father used to say that Choctaw were the most honorable people he ever met. He was a schoolteacher back in Pennsylvania, and he had a friend who was Choctaw. They used to write letters to each other. He always spoke highly of your people." Peter felt something tighten in his chest. It had been a long time since he had heard a white person speak of his people with anything other than suspicion or contempt. "Your father sounds like a good man," he said quietly. Emily nodded. "He was. I wish he could have met you." Lenora climbed onto the wagon bench and took up the reins. "Ready?" She called back to Emily. The girl nodded, settling herself more comfortably against the blankets. Peter swung up onto his horse, a sturdy paint mare he had left tethered nearby during the night. He took the lead, guiding them out of the canyon and onto a narrow trail that wound south through country that was equal parts beautiful and treacherous. The first few miles went smoothly. The trail was rocky but passable, and the mule seemed content to follow Peter's horse at a steady pace. Emily dozed in the back of the wagon, lulled by the rhythmic creaking of the wheels. Lenora kept her eyes on the trail ahead, her hands tight on the reins. Clearly still rattled by the encounter with Rook. They stopped once to rest the mule and let Emily drink more of the medicinal tea Lenora had prepared. While they rested, Peter scouted the area, looking for signs of anyone following them. He found tracks, boot prints in the soft dirt near a dried creek bed, but they were old, at least a day or two. Still, he kept his guard up. Rook was smart enough to stay out of sight until he was ready to make his move. When they started moving again, Peter changed their route slightly, taking them through a narrow defile he knew would be harder to follow. The wagon just barely fit between the rock walls, and Lenora had to work to keep the mule calm as the space closed in around them. By midday, they had covered about 8 miles. Emily was holding up better than Peter had expected, though he could see the strain in her face. Lenora suggested they stop for a proper rest, and Peter agreed. They found a spot where a cluster of cottonwood trees provided shade and a small seep provided fresh water. While Lenora tended to Emily, Peter walked the perimeter, his eyes constantly scanning the ridges above them. That was when he saw it. Smoke, just a thin wisp, barely visible against the bright afternoon sky, rising from somewhere to the north. Too far away to be Rook's campfire, but close enough to be a concern. Peter watched it for a long moment, trying to gauge the distance and direction. The smoke could belong to anyone, a prospector, a hunter, a rancher. But his instincts told him otherwise. He returned to the wagon and found Lenora kneeling beside Emily, adjusting the blankets. "There's smoke to the north," he said quietly, not wanting to alarm Emily. "Could be nothing, but we should assume it's not." Lenora's face went pale. "Rook?" Peter nodded. "Or someone working with him. Either way, we need to move faster." Lenora looked at Emily, worry clear in her eyes. "She needs rest. If we push too hard, She could relapse. Peita understood the dilemma. Push too hard and risk Emily's health. Move too slowly and risk running into Rook and whoever he had brought with him. We'll compromise, he said. We keep moving, but we take short breaks every hour. That way Emily gets rest without us losing too much time, Lenora agreed, and they set off again. The afternoon stretched on, the sun beating down mercilessly. The trail grew rougher, forcing them to slow down in places where the wagon threatened to tip over or get stuck. Peita dismounted several times to clear rocks from the path or guide the wagon around obstacles. Each delay grated on his nerves, each minute feeling like an invitation for trouble. Emily remained quiet in the back, her eyes closed, but Peita could see she was still breathing steadily. That was something at least. By late afternoon, they had covered another 5 miles, bringing them within striking distance of the settlement. But the sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, and Peita knew they wouldn't make it before dark. He called a halt in a small clearing surrounded by mesquite and juniper. We'll camp here for the night, he said. Make a small fire, just enough for warmth and to heat water for Emily's tea. Nothing that will draw attention. Lenora nodded and began unpacking supplies while Peita tended to the animals. He rubbed down the mule and his horse, making sure both had water and a bit of grain. While he worked, he kept his rifle close, his eyes constantly moving, watching the shadows lengthen as the sun dropped lower. The night came fast as it always did in the high desert. One moment there was light, the next there was darkness. Deep and absolute except for the faint glow of their fire. They ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, washing it down with water that tasted faintly of minerals. Emily managed to eat a little, which Lenora took as a good sign. After the meal, Peita walked the perimeter of their camp again, checking for tracks, for disturbances, for anything that seemed out of place. He found nothing, but the feeling of being watched persisted. It crawled along his spine, settled in his gut, made his hand drift to the knife at his belt more than once. When he returned to the fire, he found Lenora sitting alone, staring into the flames. Emily was asleep in the wagon, her breathing soft and even. Do you think we'll make it? Lenora asked without looking up. Peita sat down across from her. To the settlement? Yes, to Prescott after that? I don't know. Lenora nodded slowly. I keep thinking about what you said. About Rook coming back. About men like him always coming back. She looked up at him then, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. What if he does? What if he brings others? How do we fight men like that? Peita poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night. You don't fight them if you can help it. You avoid them. You stay smart. You don't give them an opening, and if we can't avoid them? Lenora pressed. Peita met her gaze. Then you do what you have to do to survive. You fight dirty if you have to. You use every advantage you can find. And you don't hesitate. Lenora shivered despite the warmth of the fire. I've never fought anyone in my life. I don't know if I could. Peita saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw something else. Determination. The same determination that had kept her pushing on her sister's chest even when it seemed hopeless. You're stronger than you think, he said. I saw that yesterday. You didn't give up on Emily even when she was gone. That takes strength most people don't have, Lenora smiled weakly. That was different. That was my sister. I would do anything for her. Peita nodded. Then hold on to that. If Rook comes, if anyone comes, you remember what you're fighting for. That's what will keep you going when everything else falls apart. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Lenora spoke again. Will you stay with us? After we reach the settlement? Or will you go back to your people? Peita had been asking himself the same question. His tribe was scattered now, pushed onto reservation land that was too small and too poor to support them. He had left months ago, unable to watch his people slowly starve while the government agents pocketed the supplies meant for them. He had been drifting ever since, hunting, trading, trying to find a place where he fit. Helping Lenora and Emily had given him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. "I'll stay until you're safe," he said finally. "After that, I don't know." Lenora nodded, accepting his answer. "That's more than I have any right to ask." She stood and moved toward the wagon to check on Emily one more time. Peter remained by the fire, his eyes on the darkness beyond their small circle of light. Somewhere out there, Rook was planning his next move. Peter could feel it, the same way he could feel a storm coming before the first drops of rain fell. The question wasn't if Rook would strike, but when. And whether Peter would be ready when he did. The night deepened around them, vast and indifferent to the small dramas of human life playing out beneath its canopy of stars. Peter added more wood to the fire, enough to keep it burning through the coldest part of the night. Then he settled in to keep watch, knowing that sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not tonight. Not with so much at stake. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Arizona desert, the sun hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds that promised rain but might not deliver. Peter had stayed awake through the entire night, his body tensed and ready for an attack that never came. Every sound had put him on edge. The snap of a twig, the rustle of brush, the cry of a night bird. But Rook hadn't shown himself. That bothered Peter more than if the man had attacked. It meant Rook was being patient, planning something bigger than a simple robbery. Patient men were dangerous men, and Silas Rook had survived in this harsh country long enough to prove he knew how to wait for the right moment. Lenora emerged from the wagon just as the first light touched the eastern horizon. She looked worn, dark circles under her eyes, her hair falling loose from the braid she had tied it in the night before. "Emily had a good night," she said, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Her fever is almost gone." She even sat up this morning and asked about breakfast. Peter felt a small measure of relief. "That's good. We need to leave within the hour. The settlement is only about 2 miles from here if we take the direct route." Lenora nodded and began packing up their meager camp. Peter doused the fire carefully, scattering the ashes and covering them with dirt. He wanted to leave as little trace of their presence as possible. They were on the trail before the sun had fully risen, the wagon creaking along a rocky path that wound through stands of Palo Verde and saguaro. The clouds overhead grew thicker, darker, and the air smelled of approaching rain. Emily sat up in the back of the wagon, wrapped in blankets, her face still pale but her eyes alert and curious. "I can see buildings ahead," she said, pointing to a cluster of structures visible in the distance. Peter nodded. "That's the settlement. We'll be there soon." But even as he said it, he felt that familiar prickle of warning at the back of his neck. Something was wrong. He couldn't see it yet, couldn't hear it, but he could feel it in his bones. They were less than a mile from the settlement when Peter saw the first sign of trouble. Fresh tracks in the dirt, multiple horses, all heading in the same direction they were going. He held up his hand, signaling for Lenora to stop the wagon. He dismounted and knelt beside the tracks, examining them closely. 5 horses, maybe 6, all shod, all moving at a steady pace. The tracks were recent, made within the last few hours. "What is it?" Lenora called from the wagon. Peter stood and walked back to her. "Riders passed through here this morning. Could be anyone, but I don't like the timing." Lenora's face went pale. "You think it's Rook?" Peter nodded slowly. "Or people working with him. Either way, we need to be careful." He climbed back onto his horse and drew his rifle from its scabbard, resting it across his saddle. They continued forward, slower now, Peter's eyes scanning every rock and shadow for signs of an ambush. The settlement appeared gradually as they rounded a bend in the trail. It was small, just as Peter had described, a whitewashed church with a bell tower, Half a dozen adobe houses scattered around it, a well in the center of a dusty plaza, and a corral where a few horses stood. But something was off. The plaza was too quiet. No children playing, no women at the well, no men tending to morning chores. The place felt abandoned, or worse, held hostage. Peter raised his hand again, stopping the wagon. "Stay here," he said quietly to Lenora. "Don't come into the settlement until I signal that it's safe." Lenora gripped the reins tighter. "What are you going to do?" Peter checked his rifle. "I'm going to find out what's going on." He rode forward slowly, his eyes moving from window to window, from doorway to doorway. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the creak of his saddle and the soft clop of his horse's hooves on the hard-packed dirt. When he reached the edge of the plaza, he saw them. 6 men, armed and spread out in strategic positions around the settlement. They weren't hiding exactly, but they weren't making themselves obvious either. They stood in shadows, in doorways, behind corners, their rifles held loosely but ready. And in the center of the plaza, sitting on a wooden chair like he was holding court, was Silas Rook. Rook smiled when he saw Peter, a predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth. "There he is," Rook called out. "The noble savage come to save the day." He stood up, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "You're predictable, Peter. I knew you'd bring them here. Maria Consuela's place, right? Everyone knows she helps people, no questions asked. Made it real easy to figure out where you were headed." Peter kept his horse moving forward at a steady walk, closing the distance between them, but staying just out of pistol range. "Let these people go, Rook, whatever you want. It's not worth this," Rook laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the adobe walls. "See, that's where you're wrong. Those 2 women you're protecting? They're worth plenty. That wagon's got supplies, maybe some money hidden away. And that younger girl, once she's healthy again, I know some folks who'd pay good money for a pretty white girl, willing or not." Peter felt rage flood through him, hot and immediate. "You touch either of them, and I'll kill you." Rook's smile widened. Big talk from one man surrounded by 6. "How about you put down that rifle and we talk this through like civilized people?" Peter didn't move. "Where are the people who live here?" Rook shrugged. "Locked in the church. They're fine, long as everyone cooperates. Maria Consuela tried to give me some trouble, but we convinced her to see things our way." Behind Rook, one of the church doors opened slightly, and Peter caught a glimpse of faces inside, frightened, watching. Maria Consuela was there. He could see her gray hair, her weathered face pressed against the gap in the door. She met his eyes for just a moment, and in that moment he saw both fear and faith. She believed he would do something. The question was what? 6 armed men against 1. Bad odds even for someone with Peter's experience. But he had faced worse. He had fought in tribal conflicts where he was outnumbered 10 to 1. He had survived ambushes that should have killed him. He was still here because he knew how to think, how to use terrain and timing and his opponent's assumptions against them. "Here's how this is going to work," Rook said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You're going to ride back to that wagon. You're going to tell those women to come into the settlement nice and peaceful. We'll take what we need, and if everyone behaves, nobody has to get hurt. You can even ride away after if you want. I got no particular grudge against you." Peter shook his head. "That's not happening." Rook's expression darkened. "Then we got a problem. Because I'm taking what I came for one way or another. Only question is how many people die in the process." Peter was calculating distances, angles, cover. The men Rook had brought were spread out, but they were focused on him. They weren't watching the edges of the settlement, weren't paying attention to anything except the confrontation happening in front of them. That was a mistake. A small one, but Peter had built a life on exploiting small mistakes. He also knew something Rook didn't. Lenora Garland was not the kind of woman who stayed where she was told when people she cared about were in danger. He had seen that in her eyes the night before, had heard it in her voice when she talked about fighting for her sister. She wouldn't stay hidden behind that bend in the trail. She would find a way to help. Last chance, Peita, Rook said. Bring them in or we come get them. Peita met Rook's eyes. Come try. For a moment, the plaza held its breath.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
Then everything exploded into motion. Rook went for his pistol. Peita spurred his horse hard to the right, toward the cover of a water trough. The 6 men raised their rifles. And from behind them, from a direction none of them were watching, came the sharp crack of a rifle shot. One of Rook's men went down, clutching his shoulder, his rifle clattering to the ground. Everyone froze, confused, trying to figure out where the shot had come from. Peita didn't waste the opportunity. He rolled off his horse and came up behind the water trough, his rifle already at his shoulder. He fired twice, fast and accurate. Another of Rook's men went down, this one not getting back up. Rook dove for cover behind the well, shouting orders to his remaining men. Find that shooter. Find them now. But his men were panicking, caught between Peita in front of them and an unknown threat behind. Another shot rang out and a third man dropped, screaming. Peita fired again, aiming for the man closest to the church. The bullet caught him in the leg and he fell, his rifle sliding across the dirt. That left Rook and 2 others. Peita used the chaos to move, sprinting from the water trough to the corner of a nearby building. As he ran, he caught a glimpse of movement on a rooftop across the plaza. Lenora, lying flat on her stomach, Emily's rifle at her shoulder, her face set in grim determination. She had climbed up there somehow, positioned herself perfectly, and started picking off Rook's men with a precision that spoke of a father who had taught his daughters more than just how to sew. Rook saw her too. Get that woman, he screamed, but his remaining men were more interested in staying alive than following orders. One of them broke and ran, disappearing down an alley. The other raised his rifle toward Lenora's position, but Peita shot him before he could fire. The man spun and fell, his rifle discharging harmlessly into the air. That left only Rook. He crouched behind the well, his pistol in one hand, his eyes wild with rage and fear. This isn't over, he shouted. You hear me? This isn't over. Peita stepped into the open, his rifle aimed at Rook's position. It is for today. Drop the gun and walk away while you still can. Rook laughed, but there was no humor in it now, only desperation. Walk away? To where? You've ruined me, Peita. Everyone saw what happened here. Word'll spread. Nobody'll work with me again. I'm a dead man walking. Peita kept his rifle steady. That's your choice. You made it when you decided to prey on people weaker than you. Now put down the gun. For a long moment, Rook didn't move. Then, slowly, he set the pistol on the ground and stood up, his hands raised. You win, he said bitterly. This time. Peita nodded to one of the townspeople who had emerged from the church. Tie him up. The rest of them too, the ones still breathing. When the circuit judge comes through next month, they can answer for what they did here. The townspeople moved quickly, grateful to have their settlement back. Maria Consuela, a sturdy woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and capable hands, walked directly to Peita. Thank you, she said simply. If you hadn't come when you did, I don't know what would have happened. Peita shook his head. Thank her, he said, pointing to where Lenora was climbing down from the rooftop, Emily's rifle slung over her shoulder. Maria looked up at Lenora with obvious admiration. A woman who can shoot like that is worth 10 men. Lenora reached the ground and walked over, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. I couldn't just sit there and wait, she said. I knew you needed help. Peta looked at her with new respect. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Lenora managed a weak smile. My father. He said every woman should know how to protect herself, because the world doesn't always provide men willing to do it for them. I haven't fired a gun in 2 years, but I guess some things you don't forget. Emily appeared then, having driven the wagon into the settlement despite her weakened state. She looked pale and exhausted but determined. Is everyone all right? Maria Consuela immediately went to her. Come, child. Let's get you Insidine properly looked after. You're running on willpower and not much else. Over the next few hours, the settlement slowly returned to normal. The wounded men were tended to, though not with much sympathy. Rook and his surviving companions were locked in a storage shed under guard. Maria Consuela examined Emily thoroughly and declared that with proper rest and continued herbal treatments, the girl would make a full recovery. She's stronger than she looks, Maria said to Lenora. Both of you are. Lenora sat with her sister in Maria's small house, feeding her soup and watching the color slowly return to Emily's cheeks. Peta stood outside, looking toward the horizon where storm clouds were finally beginning to break apart. Letting shafts of sunlight through, Maria came out to join him. You saved us today, she said. All of us. Rook would have taken everything we had and probably hurt people in the process. Peta shook his head. I just did what needed doing. Maria studied him with those sharp eyes. You're Choctaw, yes? I remember your people. Good people. It's a shame what's been done to you, to all the tribes. Pushed off your lands, promises broken, families torn apart. It's not right. Peta appreciated her words, even though they couldn't change anything. The world isn't built on what's right. It's built on what's convenient for those with power, Maria nodded slowly. Perhaps. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting for what's right. Those two women in there, they're fighting for each other, for a future they believe in. You're fighting for them even though you just met them. That matters. That makes a difference, even if it's just a small one. Peta thought about that. Maybe she was right. Maybe small differences were all anyone could really make. But enough small differences, enough people refusing to accept cruelty as normal, might eventually add up to something bigger. He wanted to believe that. He needed to believe that, inside the house, Lenora sat beside Emily's bed, holding her sister's hand. Emily was sleeping now, her breathing deep and steady, her face peaceful for the first time in days. Lenora felt tears sliding down her cheeks, tears of relief and exhaustion and gratitude. They had come so close to losing everything. But they were still here. Still together. Still fighting. And they had found help in the most unexpected place. From a Choctaw warrior who owed them nothing but gave them everything anyway. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if they would make it to Prescott or if they would build a life there. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And they would never forget the man who had given them the chance to keep going. 3 days passed in the settlement, 3 days of healing and waiting and watching Emily grow stronger. Maria Consuela's house became a temporary sanctuary where the rhythms of recovery replaced the chaos of survival. Emily spent most of her time resting, but each day she stayed awake longer, ate more, spoke with greater clarity. The color returned to her face in increments, first a hint of pink in her cheeks, then a brightness in her eyes that had been absent since before she collapsed. Lenora rarely left her sister's side during those first 2 days, as if afraid that looking away for too long might somehow reverse the progress. But on the 3rd day, Maria gently insisted that Lenora get some air, some distance, some reminder that the world existed beyond the walls of a sick room. Lenora found Peta near the corral, working on repairing a section of fence that had been damaged during the confrontation with Rook's men. He moved with practiced efficiency, his hands sure and steady as he lashed new posts into place. She watched him for a moment before speaking, struck by how naturally he fit into this place, despite being an outsider, despite the color of his skin and the language his people spoke. The townspeople had accepted him without question after he helped drive off Rook, treated him with a respect that seemed hard-earned and genuine. "You're good at that," Lenora said finally, stepping closer. Peita looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "My father taught me," said a man who couldn't fix things had no business breaking them. Lenora smiled at that. "Sounds like a wise man," Peita nodded. "He was. He died during the removal, when they forced us to leave our lands. Pneumonia took him on the trail. We buried him in ground that belonged to no one and everyone. Just another grave in a line of graves stretching back across miles we should never have had to walk." The bitterness in his voice was old, but still sharp, like a wound that had scarred over but never properly healed. Lenora didn't know what to say to that, didn't have words adequate to address that kind of loss and injustice. So instead she just stood beside him in silence, sharing the weight of it. After a while, Peita set down his tools and leaned against the fence. "How's Emily?" Lenora's expression brightened. "Much better. Maria says she'll be strong enough to travel in a few more days. We can continue on to Prescott, start the life we came out here to find." She paused, studying his face. "What about you? What will you do?" Peita had been thinking about that question for 3 days, turning it over in his mind during the quiet hours when sleep eluded him. He had no home to return to, no family waiting for him, no place where he truly belonged. The reservation his people had been forced onto was a place of slow starvation and broken promises, and he had no desire to return there just to watch more people die. But he also had no clear path forward, no vision of what came next. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been drifting for a long time. Hunting, trading, taking odd jobs when I can find them. It's not much of a life, but it's the only one I've got." Lenora was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully, as if testing the weight of her words before fully committing to them. "You could come with us. To Prescott. I'm sure there's work there for someone with your skills. And Emily and I, we owe you more than we can ever repay. It would be good to have you nearby, to know you're safe." Peita felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of connection, of mattering to someone beyond the immediate moment. But he also felt hesitation. He had learned not to trust easy offers, not to believe that people would stand by their words once the crisis passed. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I did what anyone should have done." Lenora shook her head firmly. "No, most people would have walked past Emily when she was dying. Most people would have left us to fend for ourselves against Rook. You didn't. You chose to help, and that choice saved our lives. That means something." Before Peita could respond, Maria Consuela appeared from the direction of her house, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who had news to deliver. "Peita, Lenora, you should come inside. Emily is awake, and she wants to speak with both of you." They followed Maria back to the house, where they found Emily sitting up in bed, propped against pillows, looking more alert than she had since the day she collapsed. She smiled when she saw them. "Lenora tells me you're planning to leave soon," Emily said, her voice still soft but steadier than before. "I wanted to thank you properly, Peita, before we go. You gave me my life back." "I don't know how to repay something like that." Peita shook his head. "You don't need to repay anything. Just live well. That's enough." Emily's smile widened. "I intend to. And I intend to make sure people know what you did for us. There are too many stories about your people that paint you as savages, as threats. I want to tell a different story, one that shows the truth of who you are." Peita felt unexpected emotion tighten his throat. In a world that so often reduced him to a stereotype, to be seen as an individual, To be recognized for his actions rather than judged by his ancestry meant more than he could easily express. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means a great deal." That evening, Maria prepared a meal for everyone, a feast by the settlement's modest standards: roasted chicken, beans seasoned with chilies and cumin, fresh tortillas, and a dessert made from dried apples and honey. The townspeople joined them, filling Maria's small house to capacity, everyone eager to celebrate Emily's recovery and the end of the threat Rook had posed. The mood was light, almost joyous, people laughing and sharing stories as if trying to banish the memory of fear with an abundance of warmth. Peter sat near the edge of the gathering, not quite part of it but not entirely separate either. And for the first time in a long while, he felt something close to contentment. As the evening wore on and people began to drift home to their own houses, Lenora found Peter outside again, standing under a sky brilliant with stars. "You always seem to end up out here," she observed, coming to stand beside him. "Alone." Peter looked up at the stars. "I'm used to it. Being alone, I mean. It's easier sometimes than trying to fit into places where you're not entirely welcome." Lenora frowned. "You're welcome here. Everyone in this settlement is grateful for what you did. And Emily and I, we want you to know you have a place with us if you want it. Not out of obligation, but because we genuinely care about what happens to you." Peter turned to look at her, searching her face for signs of pity or charity, but finding only sincerity. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you care? You barely know me." Lenora considered the question seriously. "I think you know someone best when you see them in a crisis. I've seen you risk your life for strangers, show compassion when you had every reason to walk away, and fight for what's right even when the odds were against you. That tells me more about who you are than years of ordinary acquaintance ever could. And what it tells me is that you're a good man, Peter. Better than most I've met." Something in Peter's carefully constructed walls began to crack. He had spent so long protecting himself, keeping people at a distance, expecting betrayal and disappointment, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen and valued. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Coming to Prescott. Starting over there. I can't promise anything, but I'll think about it." Lenora nodded, accepting that. "That's all I ask." She hesitated, then added, "Emily and I, we lost our parents. We lost our home. We came out here with nothing but hope and each other. You've lost things too, maybe even more than we have. Maybe we're all searching for the same thing, a place to belong, people who see us for who we really are. Maybe we could find that together." The next morning brought news that complicated everything. A rider arrived from the territorial marshal's office, having heard about the incident with Rook and his men. The marshal himself would be arriving within 2 days to take statements and transport the prisoners back to stand trial. That was good news in many ways, proof that justice still functioned even in this remote corner of the territory. But it also meant Peter would have to give testimony, would have to stand before authorities who might not look kindly on a Choctaw warrior who had killed white men, regardless of the circumstances. Maria sensed his concern. "The people here will speak for you," she assured him. "We'll tell the marshal exactly what happened, how Rook and his men took us hostage, how you saved us. You have nothing to fear." But Peter knew better than to assume the law would be fair. He had seen too many instances where the color of a man's skin mattered more than the facts of a case. Still, running would only make him look guilty, would confirm whatever prejudices the marshal might hold. So he stayed, and he waited, and he tried not to think too hard about what might happen when authority arrived. Emily continued to improve, growing stronger each day. By the time the marshal was due to arrive, she was able to walk around Maria's house without assistance, even venturing outside for short periods to sit in the sun. The transformation was remarkable, a testament to both Maria's skill as a healer and Emily's own resilience. The marshal turned out to be a weathered man in his 50s named Carson Briggs, who had the look of someone who had seen enough of the world's ugliness to be skeptical of easy answers but still believed in doing his job properly. He listened carefully as Maria, Lenora, Emily, and several townspeople recounted what had happened. He examined the scene, looked at the prisoners, and asked pointed questions that suggested he was trying to understand the truth rather than simply confirm his assumptions. When it came time for Peta to give his statement, Marshal Briggs studied him with sharp, assessing eyes. "I've heard a lot about you in the last hour," Briggs said. "Seems like you're either a hero or a killer, depending on who's doing the talking. What do you say?" Peta met the marshal's gaze steadily. "I say I did what needed to be done to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Rook and his men were holding this settlement hostage. They threatened to harm innocent people if they didn't get what they wanted. I stopped them. If that makes me a killer in the eyes of the law, then I'll accept whatever consequences come from that. But I won't apologize for saving lives." Briggs nodded slowly. "Fair enough. And for what it's worth, based on what I've heard from multiple witnesses, you acted in defense of others. That's not murder. That's justifiable force. As far as I'm concerned, you're free to go." No charges. The relief that washed over Peta was profound, though he tried not to show it. Lenora, standing nearby, smiled broadly, and Emily looked like she might cry from happiness. Even Maria, usually so composed, seemed deep pleased. After the marshal and his deputies left with their prisoners, taking Rook and his surviving men away in chains, the settlement held another celebration, this one even livelier than the first. The threat was truly over now, dealt with not just by violence, but by the proper channels of law. It felt like a vindication, proof that doing the right thing could actually lead to the right outcome. That night, as the celebrations wound down, Peta made his decision. He found Lenora and Emily together, sitting outside Maria's house and looking up at the stars. "I've been thinking about your offer," he said without preamble. "About coming to Prescott with you." Lenora looked up quickly, hope clear in her expression. "And?" Peta took a breath. "I'd like to accept. If the offer still stands." Emily clapped her hands together, delighted. "Of course it still stands." "We meant every word." Lenora stood and walked over to him, extending her hand. "Partners then. Looking out for each other, building something new together." Peta took her hand, feeling the firmness of her grip, the warmth of genuine friendship. "Partners," he agreed. Over the next 2 days, they prepared for the journey to Prescott. Maria gave them supplies and advice, refusing payment and insisting it was the least she could do. The townspeople contributed what they could spare: food, blankets, a few coins that would help them get started in their new home. Emily regained more strength each day, until even Maria agreed she was well enough to travel. On the morning they were set to leave, Maria pulled Peta aside one last time. "You're doing a good thing," she said. "Those girls need someone they can trust, and you need people who see your worth. You'll be good for each other." Peta nodded. "I hope so." Maria smiled. "I know so. I've been watching people for 63 years. I can tell when something is right." She pressed a small bundle into his hands. "Herbs and medicines. Keep them with you. Life has a way of throwing surprises at us, and it's good to be prepared." The journey to Prescott took 5 days, but it was nothing like the desperate flight through the canyon that had brought them together. Emily rode in the wagon but spent increasingly long periods sitting up, watching the landscape change as they traveled north and west. Lenora and Peta rode side by side much of the time, talking about their pasts, their hopes for the future, the challenges they knew they would face in building a life in a new place. They talked about practical things too: what kind of work they might find, where they would live, how they would navigate a world that often judged people by the color of their skin or the circumstances of their birth. Prescott, when they finally reached it, was larger than the settlement, but still small by the standards of established cities. It had the raw, unfinished quality of a place still becoming itself, buildings going up alongside others that looked like they might fall down, streets that were sometimes dirt and sometimes barely cobbled. But it also had opportunity, the sense that anything was possible if you were willing to work for it. Lenora found work quickly, just as she had hoped, with a seamstress who needed help meeting the demands of a growing population. Emily, still recovering, helped in smaller ways, mending and doing detail work that didn't require long hours of standing. Peter found work too, using his skills as a tracker and hunter to supply game to several of the town's restaurants and boarding houses. It was honest work that paid decently, and more importantly, it was work where his heritage was seen as an asset rather than a liability. People wanted someone who knew the land, who could find game where others saw only empty desert. Slowly, carefully, they built a life. They found a small house on the edge of town that they could afford if they pooled their resources. It wasn't much, just 3 rooms and a roof that leaked when it rained hard, but it was theirs. They made it a home, filling it with small comforts and the warmth of genuine affection. Months passed. Emily recovered fully, her strength returning until she was able to work full days alongside Lenora. The 3 of them fell into rhythms and routines, shared meals and quiet evenings, arguments about small things and laughter about smaller ones. They became a family, not by blood but by choice, bound together by shared experience and mutual respect. Peter had never expected to find this, had given up hoping for a place where he truly belonged. But here it was, built from the ruins of loss and pain, constructed carefully through trust and commitment. One evening, nearly a year after they first arrived in Prescott, they sat together on the porch of their small house, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. Emily had been teaching at the small school that had opened in town, sharing her father's love of learning with children who had little access to formal education. Lenora's sewing business had grown to the point where she was considering hiring additional help. And Peter had become known throughout the region as one of the most reliable hunters and guides, someone who could be trusted to keep his word and do his job well. "Do you ever think about that day in the canyon?" Emily asked suddenly. "When I collapsed and you brought me back?" Peter nodded. "Sometimes. Why?" Emily smiled. "Because I think about it all the time. Not just because you saved my life, though I'll never stop being grateful for that, but because it was the day everything changed. The day we stopped just surviving and started actually living." Lenora reached over and took Peter's hand. "She's right. That was the day we found each other. The day we became who we were meant to be." Peter looked at the 2 women who had become his family, felt the weight of belonging settle comfortably around him like a well-worn coat. "I spent a long time thinking I was alone," he said quietly. "That being alone was safer, easier, less painful than risking connection. But I was wrong. This, what we have, it's worth every risk. Worth everything." Emily leaned her head on Lenora's shoulder. "We're not alone anymore. None of us. And we never will be again." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, 3 people who had found in each other what the world had tried to deny them: a home, a purpose, and a future built on hope rather than fear. The road ahead would have its challenges, its moments of difficulty and doubt. But they would face those challenges together, just as they had faced everything else. And that made all the difference. 6 months had passed since that evening on the porch when they had talked about belonging and second chances. And Prescott had continued to grow around them like a living thing, expanding and changing with each passing week. The town had added 2 new streets, a proper general store, and a church with stained glass windows shipped all the way from San Francisco. The population had nearly doubled as more families arrived seeking opportunity in the Arizona territory. bringing with them their hopes and their histories, their skills and their dreams. Through it all, Peita, Lenora, and Emily had watched their own lives transform in ways they never could have anticipated that desperate day in the canyon. Lenora's seamstress business had outgrown the small room where she had started, and she now employed 3 other women in a proper shop on Main Street. The sign above the door read Garland and Associates. Fine tailoring, and it had become the place where Prescott's growing middle class came for wedding dresses, Sunday suits, and the kind of careful alterations that made ready-made clothing look custom-fitted. Lenora had developed a reputation not just for skill but for fairness, treating her employees well and charging prices that were honest rather than exploitative. She had also become something of a voice in the community, speaking at town meetings about the need for better wages for working women and pushing for a lending library that would serve everyone regardless of their station. Emily had found her calling at the schoolhouse where she taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to children ranging from 6 to 14. The school board had been skeptical at first about hiring a woman barely 20 years old, but Emily had won them over with a demonstration lesson that showed both her competence and her genuine love of teaching. She had her father's gift for making difficult concepts accessible, for finding the angle that would help a struggling student suddenly understand what had seemed impossible moments before. Her classroom was always full, and parents praised the way their children came home excited about learning, rather than dreading the next day's lessons. Peita's reputation as a hunter and guide had spread far beyond Prescott. He now spent half his time leading hunting parties into the mountains for wealthy men from back east who wanted trophies and adventure, and the other half supplying game to the town's growing number of restaurants and hotels. The work paid well enough that he had been able to buy a small piece of land just outside town, 20 acres with a creek running through it and enough timber to build a proper cabin. He had started construction 2 months ago, working on it whenever he had free time, envisioning a place that would be entirely his own, even as he continued to share the house in town with Lenora and Emily. But the most unexpected development had been the school. Not Emily's school, but the one that Peita had helped establish for the children of the Yavapai and Apache families who lived in camps on the outskirts of town. It had started small, just Peita teaching a handful of children the skills he thought might help them navigate a world increasingly dominated by white settlers: English, basic mathematics, how to read contracts so they wouldn't be cheated by unscrupulous traders. But the project had grown as word spread, and now there were nearly 30 students meeting 3 times a week in a structure they had built themselves from adobe and salvaged lumber. The territorial government hadn't been pleased about the school at first. There were officials who believed that educating native children would only make them more difficult to control, more likely to resist the policies designed to confine and diminish them. But Peita had navigated those objections carefully, framing the school not as resistance, but as practical preparation for a world that wasn't going to return to what it had been. He emphasized reading and writing, skills that would help his students protect themselves legally and economically. And he had all eyes now, including Lenora and Emily, who had started teaching at the school themselves, and several prominent Prescott citizens who believed in education regardless of who was receiving it. On a bright Saturday morning in late October, Peita stood outside the school building watching students arrive. They came on foot, on horseback, some traveling several miles from their family camps. There was Running Deer, a 12-year-old Yavapai boy with a gift for numbers, who could calculate complex problems in his head faster than most adults could do them on paper. There was Little Bird, an Apache girl barely 8 years old who had memorized entire passages from the books Emily brought and could recite them word for word. There was Gray Wolf, a teenager who had initially resisted learning what he called the white man's tricks, but had gradually come to see the value in understanding the systems that now governed his life. Emily arrived shortly after the students. Carrying an armful of books and a slate board, she had convinced the regular school to donate. "Good morning," she called out cheerfully. "Are we ready to tackle fractions today?" A chorus of groans answered her, but they were good-natured groans, the kind students made when they knew the work would be hard, but also knew their teacher wouldn't let them fail. Peter smiled watching her work, remembering the pale, nearly dead girl he had pulled back from the edge in that canyon. The transformation was complete and remarkable. She had found her purpose, and it had made her radiant. Lenora arrived an hour later, her morning at the shop finished, ready to help with the younger children's reading lessons. She had a natural patience that served her well with students who were still struggling to connect sounds with letters, still building the foundation that would eventually allow them to read on their own. Peter often watched her with those children and thought about how different things might have been if their paths hadn't crossed. If he had chosen a different route that day. If he had decided that a woman's desperate screams were someone else's problem. The cascade of consequences from that single choice had reshaped all their lives. During the lunch break, while the students ate the simple meals they had brought from home, Peter, Lenora, and Emily sat together in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "I heard something interesting at the shop yesterday," Lenora said, pulling out the sandwiches she had prepared that morning. "There's a man from the Territorial Education Board coming to Prescott next month. He wants to see our school, the one you've built here. Apparently word has reached Santa Fe about what we're doing." Peter felt a familiar wariness settle over him. Official attention could go either way, could mean recognition and support, or could mean interference and shutdown. "What does he want?" Lenora shrugged. "According to what I heard, he's genuinely interested. He's been advocating for educational opportunities for Native children, believes it's the moral obligation of the territory. He might want to help, might want to make this official, give us actual funding and resources." Emily looked thoughtful. "That could be good. We're stretched thin as it is, teaching with donated books and supplies we buy ourselves. Proper funding could let us expand, hire more teachers, reach more students." But Peter wasn't entirely convinced. Official support comes with official control. They'll want to dictate what we teach, how we teach it. They'll want to shape these children into something that serves the territory's interests rather than the children's own futures. Lenora nodded slowly. "That's a fair concern. But maybe we can negotiate. Set terms that protect what we've built while still accepting help where it's genuinely useful. We don't have to accept everything they offer." The conversation continued through lunch and into the afternoon, weighing possibilities and risks, trying to chart a course that would serve the students without compromising the principles that had guided the school from the beginning. That evening, back at the house they shared in town, the three of them prepared dinner together as had become their custom. Peter cut vegetables while Lenora tended the stove and Emily set the table. The routines of domestic life had become comfortable, familiar in a way that felt like home rather than like shelter. "I've been thinking about something," Emily said as they sat down to eat. "About the future, about what comes next for all of us." Lenora raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." "What kind of thinking?" Emily smiled. "Not ominous, just practical. We've built something good here, the three of us. But I wonder sometimes if we've thought about what happens when things change, as they inevitably will." Peter set down his fork. "What kind of changes?" Emily looked between them. "Well, for instance, you're building that cabin on your land, Peter. Eventually you'll move out there, live on your own. That's natural and good, you should have your own space. But it will change things here. And Lenora, your business keeps growing. You might decide to expand, maybe even move to a larger town where there are more opportunities. And I might eventually get married, though I'm in no rush, or I might decide to start my own school somewhere else. My point is we should talk about these possibilities now. Make sure we're all on the same page about what we want and how we'll handle changes when they come." It was a conversation they probably should have had months ago. But there was something about the comfort of their current arrangement that had made it easy to avoid looking too far ahead. Lenora spoke first. "I'm not planning to leave Prescott. The business is here, my life is here, you're both here. Whatever expansion I do, it will be local." Emily nodded. "And I'm happy teaching at the school. I'm not looking for something else. But I did want to say that regardless of where we each end up physically living, I want us to remain family. Not just in memory of what we went through together, but because I genuinely can't imagine my life without both of you in it." Peter felt emotion tighten his chest. "I feel the same way. The cabin is for when I need solitude, when I need to be close to the land in a way that's harder to do in town. But this, what we have here, this is my real home. You two are my family in every way that matters." Lenora reached across the table and took both their hands. "Then we're agreed. Whatever changes come, we face them together. We stay family, stay connected, stay committed to each other's well-being." They sat there for a moment. Hands joined, sealing an unspoken pact that went deeper than blood or law. The weeks that followed brought the arrival of the education board official, a surprisingly progressive man named William Hutchins, who had spent years advocating for the rights of Native peoples within the limited scope available to him. He toured the school, observed classes, spoke with students and parents, and seemed genuinely impressed by what he saw. "This is exactly the kind of initiative the territory should be supporting," he told Peter after his second day of observations. "You're not trying to erase these children's culture. You're giving them tools to navigate a changing world while maintaining their identity. That's the right approach." The funding that followed wasn't enormous, but it was enough to hire 2 additional teachers, purchase proper textbooks and supplies, and make improvements to the building that would allow them to teach through the winter months. More importantly, the official recognition gave the school a legitimacy that protected it from those who had been calling for its closure. Parents who had been hesitant to send their children, worried about drawing unwanted attention from hostile authorities, now felt safer doing so. Enrollment grew to over 50 students, and Peter found himself spending more time on administration and less on actual teaching. A development he had mixed feelings about, but there were others who could teach, including 2 young Yavapai men who had been educated at mission schools and had returned to their communities hoping to serve them. Peter worked with them to develop curriculum that honored traditional knowledge, while also teaching the practical skills students needed. It was a delicate balance, always at risk of tipping too far in one direction or another, but they managed it through constant communication and adjustment. Emily became particularly close to one of the new teachers, a thoughtful man named Tall Pine, who shared her passion for making learning accessible and engaging. Lenora noticed the way they looked at each other and smiled privately, recognizing the early stages of something that might grow into more. Peter's cabin neared completion as autumn turned toward winter. It was a solid structure, built to last, with a stone fireplace and windows positioned to catch both the morning sun and the evening breezes. He had dug a well and built a small barn for his horse and the pack mules he used for his guiding business. The land around it was beautiful, pinyon and juniper dotting the hillsides, the creek providing constant music, wildlife abundant enough that he could hunt without traveling far. He moved his personal belongings out there gradually, spending weeknights in town where he was closer to the school and his family, spending weekends at the cabin where he could work the land and enjoy solitude. One Saturday in early December, Lenora and Emily came out to see the finished cabin. They brought food and wine, turned the visit into a celebration, christening the space with laughter and stories and the warmth of genuine affection. "You've built something beautiful," Lenora said, standing on the porch and looking out at the view. "This suits you." Peter nodded. "It feels right. I never thought I'd have something like this. A place that's truly mine. Land I can build on and improve without anyone's permission." Emily was exploring inside, admiring the craftsmanship. You should be proud. You did this yourself, with your own hands and your own vision. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the three of them sat on the porch much as they had done months before at the house in town. But this time the conversation turned not to the past but to the future, to dreams that seemed more achievable now than they had in those early days. Lenora talked about her hope to eventually publish a book about her experiences, about building a business and a life in the West as a woman on her own. Emily spoke about her desire to develop new teaching methods specifically designed for students whose first language wasn't English. And Peter shared his vision for expanding the school into a broader community center, a place that could serve not just children but entire families, offering legal assistance, medical care, and protection against the exploitation that too often targeted Native communities. We've come a long way, Emily observed. From that canyon where I nearly died to this, to lives we've built intentionally rather than lives that just happened to us. Lenora agreed. And we did it together. That's what I'm most proud of. Not what we accomplished individually, though that matters, but the fact that we created something larger than ourselves. We became family by choice, and that family has been the foundation for everything else. Peter looked at them both, these two remarkable women who had come into his life by chance and stayed by choice. I spent years believing I had lost everything that mattered. My people were scattered, my family gone, my homeland taken. And in some ways that's all still true. Those losses are still real. But I found something new here. Not a replacement for what was lost, but something different and equally valuable. I found purpose, connection, and a future worth working toward. Emily raised her glass. To second chances then. And to the family we chose. They toasted as the stars began to appear overhead. The same stars that had witnessed their first desperate meeting in the canyon. The same stars that would continue watching long after their stories were complete. The wind carried the scent of pine and sage. The creek sang its endless song. And somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. The world continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to human dramas. But within those rhythms, these three people had carved out space for themselves, had claimed their right to exist and thrive, despite everything that had tried to prevent it. In the months and years that followed, their lives would continue to evolve and change. Emily would eventually marry Tall Pine, and together they would establish schools in 3 other communities, spreading the model they had developed in Prescott. Lenora would indeed write her book, and though it would never achieve wide distribution, it would become an important document for historians studying women's experiences in the territorial period. And Peter would become a respected elder in the broader Native community. Someone younger people came to for advice and guidance. Someone who had learned to navigate between worlds without losing himself in either. But those were stories for other days. On this particular evening, as the temperature dropped and they moved inside to continue their celebration by the warmth of the fireplace, what mattered most was the simple fact of their presence together. The reality of the bonds they had forged and the lives they had built. They had survived the canyon, survived Rook's attack, survived their own losses and traumas, and had emerged not just intact but strengthened, not just surviving but truly living. That was the real victory, the real triumph worth celebrating. Not that they had avoided hardship, because they hadn't, but that they had faced it together and refused to let it define them. As the fire burned low and the conversation drifted into comfortable silence, Peter looked at Lenora and Emily and felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the chance encounter that had brought them together. For the choices they had each made to stay and build something rather than drift apart. For the grace that had allowed them to find in each other what the world had tried to deny them. The future remained uncertain in many ways, full of challenges they couldn't yet anticipate. But they would face whatever came as they had faced everything else together, with courage and compassion and an unwavering commitment to each other's well-being. And that, Peter thought, was more than enough. That was everything.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.